Nature Revisited. Nature Revisited is a podcast that explores our relationship with the natural world. It consists of interviews, stories, and discussions that highlight the notion that nature is not a place one goes to, but rather a place one is already a part of, that we are nature. For those of you who are new to the podcast, my name is Stefan Van Noorden. On this episode of Nature Revisited, we welcome Kelsey Timmerman, author of the new book, Regenerating Earth: Farmers Working with Nature to Feed Our Future. Kelsey is a journalist, speaker, and best-selling author. In his new book, Regenerating Earth, Kelsey sets out on a journey that takes him around the world, exploring hopeful alternatives to industrial agriculture. Kelsey visits the Amazon, Hawaii, Kenya, and Georgia here in the U.S. to learn more about regenerative agriculture from farmers, indigenous groups, and activists who are working with nature rather than against it. Kelsey shares how our food choices can connect us to land, life, and one another. Kelsey joins me from his home in Indiana to share some of the stories from the people he met who are trying to regenerate the earth. So Kelsey, welcome to Nature Revisited. It's a pleasure having you on the podcast, talking about your new book, Regenerating Earth, which is the result of your traveling around the world, talking with farmers and activists who see agriculture as the solution, not the problem. You say at the beginning of the book that no question has changed your daily life more than the one that inspired this book. What is regenerative agriculture? Why is that such an important question?
As I traveled around, I met people around the world and in the United States who practice an agriculture that is truly regenerative, makes the place where they live better for the people who live on it, in the soil, the birds, the insects, the animals. And I saw that they had like a connection that was missing in my own life. So I wanted to experience what a little bit of that was like. So to give you an example, just my daily routine is different. I wake up in the morning and I walk down my long lane to the chicken coop, and I let the chickens out, gather some eggs, walk back, and then I make eggs for my wife and kid. Then at night, I have to make the trek back. I have to put the chickens up. So here I am, just wishing these chickens would go to bed, and it's like 9:30 at night. On those walks to and from the chicken coop, I get a sense for where I live a little bit more. Some of the places I went were practicing like holistic management and rotational grazing of livestock. I wanted to experience a little bit what that was like. Just my daily routine on my 20 acres north of Muncie, Indiana, in a rural area surrounded by corn and soybeans, just this little oasis that I live on of wildness. That question has changed my daily life. And it has changed the way that I see and think about the world. Regenerative agriculture, farming with nature and not against it, can do some really powerful things. We feel less alone when we're connected with nature, with animals, with plants, and with each other. Regenerative agriculture kind of requires human connection as well. One of the few things that can actually take carbon out of the air and put it in the ground are plants. And the more we have living roots and plants on our land, the more carbon we're sequestering. So there's so much to be hopeful about when it comes to regenerative agriculture.
What is the difference between permaculture and regenerative agriculture?
I think people have different definitions of regenerative agriculture. It can get kind of squishy. But the way I see it, I see regenerative agriculture as an umbrella term where things like agroecology, holistic management, and permaculture can fit under that as well. When you visit a really nice permaculture place, it is getting better. They are farming with nature and they are regenerating the land. Permaculture, I see that term used more on a homestead level. Same principles of regenerative agriculture. You care for the earth, care for the people, and then you produce foods and fiber that honor those relationships. But like I said, it's usually done on more of a homestead level. And I see regenerative agriculture as a larger umbrella under which some of these other ways of interacting with nature in terms of agroecology, I would even put biodynamics in that, and permaculture fits under that as well.
So, on your search for your answer, why did you start with a new forest farm in Wisconsin? And what did you find there?
A new forest farm is absolutely amazing. It's 106 acres of permaculture. The founder of New Forest Farms is a guy named Mark Shepard. He was working as an engineer and just felt like he belonged out in the wild in the forest more. And so he studied permaculture and was kind of a homesteader up in Alaska. And then as his family started to grow, he came to Wisconsin and to the driftless areas. And he bought this 100 acres that was previously corn and soybeans. And he planted so many trees, 100 acres of trees that include chestnuts, hazelnuts, and elderberry. And the list of things that Mark grows on his property are sort of endless. As I was driving up to it, I'm driving past these fields of corn on hills. And then there's this wildness kind of unkept area that is Mark Shepard's. And it is very kept. It is very intentional. And it is very planned out, that uses every permaculture principle out there, that is totally off the grid. He's completely self-sufficient. Mark looked at what this land used to be, and it was a forest. And so he sought to emulate what that land once was. He practices something that he calls strategic total utter neglect. Mark plants trees, apple trees, pear trees. If a tree is not going to make it, it's not going to make it. He's not going to try to grow perfect apples. He has a lot of apple trees. He's not going to tend them really closely. And that's it. And he's going to get a crop from those trees. Someone who has an orchard would look at Mark trees. This is an absolute mess. But they spend a lot of money on chemical inputs and a lot of time caring for these trees. And so they have a lot more inputs in terms of cost. And Mark doesn't have any. Mark says that he's going to let the apples do what the apples are going to do. And then he's going to go fishing. He's able to completely feed his family and help feed his community on this 100 acres. Now, if you look at 100 acres of corn, first off, we're not going to eat that. 40% of that corn is going to go into fuel. And the rest of it might come back to us in terms of corn chips and sodas and other processed foods, but it's not feeding anyone. So Mark is this great example of how we can grow food that can feed ourselves and our community, and that permaculture can be done at a larger scale than just a homestead. And Mark is someone that is sharing his knowledge, speaks all over the United States. He has a school that he works with in Africa that have their own Mark Shepard permaculture system. I chose New Forest Farm because he pretty much had everything that I saw of what regenerative agriculture was. Not using chemicals or using fewer chemicals, disturbing the soil as little as possible, It's always having a living root in the ground and acknowledging life in the soil that has these connections that we don't want to break up between the roots and the mycorrhizal fungi. And also, I think that all the farmers I met, including Mark, are rejecting the industrial system in some way or wholly. There seems to be a spiritual connection of some sort, although I'm not sure Mark would describe it like that. Certainly the indigenous peoples I met would describe it like that. The terms and the words that people use, they're just much more connected to the land in a really meaningful way. And I think that's also a really critical part of regenerative agriculture.
So on the second stop in your book, you revisit the Arhuaco in Sierra Nevada de Santa in Colombia, referred to locally as the heart of the world. What did you learn from your first visit there, and why was it important to return?
The first time I was there, I was researching a book called Where Am I Eating, where I looked at common foods that we import. Cacao in West Africa, bananas from Costa Rica, apple juice from China. I went to Colombia for coffee. And so I followed my Starbucks coffee to southern Colombia, an area called Nariño, and I spent time with the farmers there. And then I wanted to look at fair trade coffee. I got pointed to the Arhuaco. I just knew they were fair trade coffee farmers. I was picked up at the airport, whisked away up into the mountains, and soon realized that I was in for a much bigger experience than I originally thought. It wasn't just coffee farmers. It was this culture, this amazing culture that had been in this area since time immemorial. And it's very unique. They wear white robes that they make themselves. The men wear white pointed hats that resemble the peaks of mountains. It was this really cool that felt like for the first time in my life, I was sort of an ethnographer there to learn about this culture and how they believe they were put in this place, which they refer to as the heart of the world, that their prayers keep the whole world from falling into despair. And that if anything happened in the heart of the world, it would very negatively impact the rest of the world. So these people that are basically organic and fair trade and regenerative by culture believe that they have the ultimate impact on the entire world. What if I thought where I lived was the heart of the world, and all of us did? And if we all took such responsibility for where we lived and the impact that our local communities made and contributed negatively or positively to the rest of the world. They are truly regenerative in every sense of the word. I showed up this time to learn about what does it mean to regenerate with the cycles of nature. And so I thought they'd show me some farming techniques. They would show me, oh yeah, here's how we use mulching techniques, or here's how we use compost. Here's how we use diversity to manage against pests, something like that. And so first off, I meet a mamo, which is their spiritual leaders. Basically, I have to get permission from him and the mountains to meet more of the people from their culture, and then to meet higher up mamo. They ask about my intentions and what I was doing there. And then finally, I got permission. I think that's one of the lessons we can take from the Arhuaco, to think about what our intentions are before we do something to the land or with the land. And then also to have this deep responsibility for the land. They told me that I would have to go back another time before I would truly understand.
So how did your trip to Kenya cause you to, quote, rethink many things? And what were some of them?
2 points I'll talk to here. One is it kind of made me rethink the Green Revolution a little bit. Obviously, millions of lives were saved by Norman Borlaug's efforts to spread seeds around the world, especially in India. Millions of lives were saved. And there's an effort now to kind of have a Green Revolution 2.0 take place in Africa. Even in India, farmers that step on to this treadmill of using seeds that have been modified to use certain chemicals. It's not really sustainable for them to do that. So I visited Kenya to see kind of how the Green Revolution 2.0 was happening. I had a young woman named Celestine who's almost an anti-Green Revolution activist who's working with principles of permaculture to help people in her community sort of remember how they once farmed. Well, at the same time, nonprofits have come in from the West that are giving seeds to these farmers, these subsistence farmers, and they're giving them fertilizers and the chemicals to help grow these seeds. They're giving them to them for a loan, so they have to pay back that loan. Many of the farmers I met aren't able to do that, where before they grew a great diversity of plants that they could eat. If a crop got hit by a pest and got wiped out, well, they had other things. They had diversity to turn to. So Celestine was helping some of these farmers remember some of that diversity. Our agrochemical reliant way of farming is being spread around the world and being imposed in these areas that are different than ours. And that difference of culture aren't really being considered. In other places in Africa, studies have shown that this help in terms of low cost seed and fertilizers and agrochemicals have been put to use for years. The nutrition levels haven't gone up. The levels of hunger haven't really gone down. We've removed the diversity of a diet from these communities at very negative consequences. So then Celestine asked me after we'd spent time visiting some of the farmers that she worked with. She's like, you really should come to my hometown and see the sanding. So we go there and we're walking around, and then all of a sudden we see land that looks like it had been bombed. There was an area before me the size of Central Park that had just been absolutely decimated. It was like a mini Grand Canyon. And what had happened here was that farmers were having trouble making a living from their soil. And beneath that soil is really coarse sand in this part of Kenya. Sand is a commodity that is needed for construction projects, and there's a shortage of it. So people will come and offer them money for the sand beneath their soil. And so that soil is torn up and that sand is dug out. So as we're standing there, I see these towers, something like you would see at Arches National Park, these untouched towers with little like toupees of topsoil. And I asked Celestine, why didn't they dig those? And she said, those are graves. So in this culture, they bury their family members around their house. And so they had sold their property. And yet the Sanders were, out of respect, were digging around the graves. In some of these towers, you could see bones sticking out. When a society loses faith in their soil, we're at the end. Soil is life and sand is death. And so that was one thing that visiting Kenya told me. Another one was I hung out with a guy named Dalmas, who was a Maasai. So my friend Dalmas shared with me a little bit about what his life has been like. And so he grew up as a kid in a very communal living situation. For the Maasai, cattle are a very critical part of their culture, identity, and of their food source. So the leaders would decide on where are we going to graze the cattle today. And the cattle would go off with herders and they would graze a certain area. And then they would come back home near the protection of the community. And so then one day, someone shows up from the government and says, actually, we're going to divide up this land and each family is going to have a certain part of this land. And it's like a big area. So these families were granted hundreds, if not thousands of acres at a time. And so they divided up the communal cattle. So then the families just grazed on their land only. So this Western idea of land ownership was imposed upon the Maasai shortly after that, the land became pretty decimated. Desertification was starting to set in. The lions left. The other big animals left. The grasses would no longer sustain. Then Dalmas's neighbors would have to sell their land. It's this idea we can impose our Western values and ideals upon a culture, it decimates that culture. And so Dalmas told me, I don't think capitalism is the way for the Messiah. So those are two stories that really stand out to me from my time in Kenya.
So in the book, you say, if any group of people can dip their toes into the river of capitalism and not get washed away on the river of growth, it's indigenous and traditional societies. Why is that, and what can they teach us?
Often their values are different than Western values. They often value community and culture and the life that surrounds them. They had a much deeper connection with where they live. Like in Brazil, we've taken our Western idea of agriculture and have imposed it upon the Amazon. So I saw places in the Amazon where I could show you a picture, I could show my neighbor a picture, and you would say, oh, that's Indiana. They cut down one of the most diverse places on our planet and planted a monocrop of corn and soybeans. Near this, I met an indigenous group known as a Tupinamba. They realize all the abundance that exists and how much products they have made and lived on that sustain their lives in a regenerative way, in a way that's not reducing the Amazon. They are developing products to sell in Santorini. So they're dipping their toes into capitalism, and that allows them to do things like send some of their bright young people to university. So I met a woman named Raquel Tupinamba who has her PhD. She's helping to develop some of these products and also allowing them, if someone is really sick in their community and they think that they would best be served by Western medicine, then they can have them transported to Santorini and they can get the help that they need. With the money that they make, sending people to law school, that then they can fight for their land right. Because of the Arhuaco being able to fight in the courts in Colombia, they have gained access to lands that formerly did not have access to. They can build libraries and health clinics with the fair trade premium that they get. They can interact with the outside world on their own terms.
So why did you visit Hawaii? And what did you learn there?
The island of Kauai has this amazing story. There's corn growing on the island of Kauai. And when I learned that, I'm like, the corn is an Indiana thing. It's a Midwest thing. It's an Iowa thing. It's not a Hawaii thing. It shouldn't be on the island of Kauai. So I learned about this community's issues with some of the agrochemical companies and the fight that they put up. Corn was spreading on the western side of the island where more of the native Hawaiians live. There was a time in 2008 where kids were out playing on the playground and they all started having burning eyes and they were nauseous and kind of this mass kind of event. And so some people started to ask around, like, well, what's being sprayed on these cornfields around us? So one of the benefits of having corn on the island of Kauai is that you could have 3 growing seasons. If you're developing a new seed or a new mix of chemicals you're spraying on them, that also means that you're spraying 3 times the amount of poisons on that land. It's really awkward for people to ask the question of what's being sprayed because many of the people on the west side of the island work for these agrochemical companies. As this footprint of corn was growing and people started asking questions, some community members went to a council member, Gary Husser, and asked him, could you find out what's happening here? He asked, well, what are you spraying? When are you spraying it? Where are you spraying it? And they said, that's none of your business. We're not going to tell you. So they went and fought in the county council to force these companies to tell them, what poisons are you spraying near our school? And so there was this upwelling of activism. When the county council meetings would happen, there'd be hundreds and hundreds of people outside, both for the chemical companies and against the chemical companies. And eventually the community, they won and then they lost. And here they were fighting some of the largest corporations on earth. So eventually, Gary and some other community activists went to Switzerland to the headquarters of Syngenta. And so Gary stood up there and addressed the shareholders of Syngenta in Switzerland and said, hey, look, on my tiny island, you are spraying chemicals which are banned in Switzerland. And you are suing my island to spray these chemicals next to schools and hospitals. Like, what else do we call that other than evil? But the collective action of the residents on the island of Kauai fought that evil and won. And that gives me a lot of hope.
So you look at regenerative agriculture through a global lens. How different is that from what we are seeing here in the U.S.?
So in the US, when I first started to learn about regenerative agriculture, I was really excited because I've seen the rural communities where I live now and where I grew up in Western Ohio. Those communities have been decimated. So when I first heard of regenerative agriculture could be a possible solution to help our rural communities, I wanted to look into it more. The first things I saw seemed to be white Midwestern farmers as kind of the leaders of regenerative agriculture. First, I thought that's what it was. It's a great hope for my community. We can use these practices of cover crops and getting the animals back on the land. I think of Gabe Brown, who's a farmer that gets mentioned a lot, doing amazing work, discovering some of these practices on his own. And I saw Will Harris at White Oak Pastures in Bluffton, Georgia, and all that he's done to regenerate not only the land from being industrial corn and peanuts, but now into these lush pastures that feel like you're on a safari there. So I saw their work and saw a lot of hope. Where did they learn these things and where did they seek them out? Will Harris and Gabe Brown learned a lot from Alan Savory, who is in Zimbabwe. Alan Savory is a rancher. A lot of his knowledge came from some of the indigenous trackers that he worked with in Zimbabwe as he was growing up there as a tracker. If you look at the roots of the regenerative movement in the United States, you can trace them back to indigenous wisdom and the wisdom of traditional farmers. One of the things that we were missing is that we thought we had landed on this new thing, and it's not a new and exciting thing. It's an old and exciting thing.
So what are we missing when fewer than 2% of American farmers are people of color?
That's a real travesty. 100 years ago, there was actually more Black farmers than there are today. Only 2% of Americans are like farmers, and a fraction of those live on commercially viable farms. And 2% of the 2% are farmers of color. So when they did have more access to land, they were shut out of many of the USDA programs that white farmers have benefited from. So we are missing on that knowledge that they had. Some of the seeds that are grown today were brought over from Africa. And there's a great farmer named Leah Penniman who wrote a book called Farming While Black. Beautiful story of how women in their braided hair had seeds from their homeland. They brought those seeds over to the United States, and on their small plots of land, they were growing those things. So just think of all the knowledge that they brought with them. Many people, and Leah Penniman writes about this in her book, many Black people see farming as like the scene of the crime, that they were forcibly brought over from their homeland, used as slave labor to farm. It is hard now to get people of color to want to farm because there's so much trauma involved with that. Leah Penniman is doing amazing work to help farmers of color reconnect with the land and get back into farming. I think a theme I see in this book is how diversity makes our world more interesting and more resilient. We need more types of things being grown, and we need all types of people on the land growing them. That includes farmers of color.
So how can people learn more about regenerative agriculture, not only here in the U.S., but globally?
A really good way is to start in your own backyard. There's a great map on the website of Regeneration International. You click Farm Map, and chances are you have a regenerative farm near you. If it's truly a regenerative farm, they would love for you to come out and visit them and learn about what they do. So that's a great place to start. There's also certifications that you can look out for to support regenerative farmers. There's one Regenerative Organic Alliance called the ROC certification, the Regenerative Organic Certification. And that's starting to be seen on shelves. There's also the Real Organic Project. Start in your backyard, go visit some farmers in your community, and then start to look for it on the shelf. So maybe eat a little bit less meat and higher quality, grass-fed, regeneratively raised, or maybe you choose to buy regenerative coffee. Just start with one product and get to know that farm a little bit. When we can't have connection with the farmers, we can try to rely on these certifications. But better than certification is connecting with the farmers in your community. So those are two ways.
So lastly, when someone walks up the road to your farm and you say, "What do you want?" and they reply, "What is regenerative agriculture?" what would you say?
First, I would say, have you seen my sheep? They got out again. So it's almost something that you have to experience. And I would have them walk around and see what a place looks and feels like when it's not just put to plow and corn and agrochemicals. And I could also show them the leaves on the trees because my neighbors have recently sprayed. I could show them the damage. I would take them to my neighbor's field and I would have them scoop up a handful of the dirt, try to clump it up, and it wouldn't stick together. It often looks like sand. It looks like a desert. Where if you dug into the forest, if you dug into the garden, if you dug into the pasture where the sheep are, you could almost stick your hand in it. You can smell it. You can clump it up in your hand. It's a much different experience. Like, smell the richness of that soil. And it's more than just how we farm. It's how we see ourselves in nature. One of the native Hawaiian cultural practitioners told me that when he's teaching young Hawaiians, he asked them, "What river do you belong to?" And I just love that question. We all belong to some river. All of our environmental sins end up in the river at some point. We're impacted by those who are upstream, and we impact those who are downstream. And if we start to think about that, we start to see ourselves as living in our own heart of the world and making an impact.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Kelsey Timmerman and that you take the opportunity to read his latest book, Regenerating Earth. You can also visit his website, kelseytimmerman.com, to learn more about the work Kelsey is doing. If you enjoyed this episode of Nature Revisited, please share with friends, family, and colleagues. And please rate us on your favorite podcast server. It will help us to reach a larger audience. You can follow Nature Revisited on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and on our website, nortonproductions.com. And please share your comments and suggestions for future guests for Nature Revisited on the comment section of this episode on our website. The music for this episode is The Machine in the Garden by Ben Cosgrove from his album, The Trouble with Wilderness. The Nature Revisited team consists of Stefan Van Orden, Charles Gagan, and Scott Chasky. And I hope you will join us for the next edition of Nature Revisited. And in the meantime, remember, we are nature.